Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on gender and education, today we are going to talk on women and work. And for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Shruti Vip. Dr. Shruti Vip is Assistant Professor in Department of History, PGDAV Evening College, University of Delhi. Dr. Vip's immense experience in the area as well as her desire to give the students the best will help us out in understanding today's topic in detail. So let's welcome our guest, Dr. Shruti Vip, and let's try to get in-depth knowledge on the topic, that is women and work. Hello ma'am, welcome to the lecture.
Hello Geetika. Thanks a lot for giving me this platform where I can speak on the topic which is quite relevant, particularly in the context of the recent International Women's Day that we celebrated. So carrying our discussion further on the series that is gender and education, today would be the kind of concluding lecture where I would be throwing light on a number of topics that we have discussed, and all these topics would ultimately be concluded with detailed reference to work, because it is ultimately any kind of education, training or skill development is of no use unless and until women are able to work, they are able to get employed. So we would be discussing what is the raw deal that women get once they get educated and how there are various discrepancies that exist in this sphere. So carrying our discussion further, I would be talking briefly about inequities that exist in the realm of work, that is in the sphere of employment. And these inequities are there not only in the public sector but also in the private sector. So we would be taking them up one by one, and then we would be kind of find out linkages and how to deal with these inequities. Now a very important precondition that exists when women come out of their homes to work is the absence of enabling conditions, and also existence of discriminatory salary scales, and also absence of fringe benefits. So these three are very important criteria that mar or make a woman's ability to prove herself in the workplace. For example, if we talk about the developing world, I have given you a number of examples for India, but if we give an example from Africa, various African countries, where women earn on an average between 72 to 70% of what African men earn with the same level of education. So therefore, education is not the only criteria for women to prove themselves, rather their femininity remains an important yardstick also. Then another important factor that needs to be discussed is the chilly climate that exists for women in the workplaces, especially in the institutions of higher education, in the universities, etc. And due to this chilly climate, due to the absence of warmth and amicable relationships, due to the hidden fears of masculinity, and also due to the incompatibility between femininity and masculinity, which does not really allow a cordial relationship to exist in the workplace, this chilly climate becomes too much of a barrier for women to break. And this results in another barrier, and that is the glass ceiling. That is, there exist so many ceilings which are there in the minds of women. So in reality, they are not there, but just like glass, it creates an effect of a mirage. It creates an image, and that image starts appearing like a reality. So similarly, so many barriers appear in the minds of women, which are directly or indirectly a result of the chilly climate which is existing in a number of organizations and institutions. So therefore, this chilly climate ultimately arises out of unreasonable workload and the dual pressures of performing in the domestic as well as in the work sphere, and also absence of regular counseling absence of some kind of monitoring, regular counseling, mentorship, and supervision, which is very much needed in such cases. Then another problem is that even if women reach high in their academic and career lives as associate professors and professors, but they are often unwilling to put themselves forward for the management and leadership positions. This again is primarily due to the two factors that I explained just now, that is chilly climate and the glass ceiling, which creates a number of barriers knowingly or unknowingly in the minds of women. So they are happy staying in the teaching positions, but when it comes to selecting a leadership or a managerial positions, they just withdraw themselves and they are not really very comfortable with these kind of offers. Then carrying our discussion further on inequities, organizations are generally revolving around two clusters. So one is the competency cluster, which is considered as earmarked for men, that is male competencies, and then the warmth cluster, which is generally earmarked for the females working in the workforce. So therefore women are seen as low in the competency sector, whereas they are considered as very good in the warmth cluster. So this kind of dichotomy between what is feminine and what is masculine further creates difficulties and barriers in the workforce, in the path of women's upliftment. Then another issue is that women invariably have to work harder in order to prove themselves and in order to prove their worth, because ultimately they have to break the male bastion and they have to prove their worth. So therefore they end up working much harder, and even while they are in the process of working much harder, they are not really able to get any respite in the domestic sphere, which again creates a lot of tensions and hardships in their personal lives, which ultimately takes a toll on their health as well as family life. So to create a work-life balance becomes a far more difficult and a challenging task for a woman as compared to a male leader. So a female leader has to cross all these barriers, and unless and until her path is facilitated by providing regular counseling and such leadership sessions where her doubts and her journey can be facilitated enough, the change is not going to come easily. Then one has to question as to why greater competency has to be shown by women from time to time. Why can't they take things easily, and why can't things happen automatically the way they happen in the case of the male workforce? Definitely some changes have come about in this approach, and one reference can be made to the 11th 5-year plan and how the contemporary times are changing with a changing strategy. For example, the 11th 5-year plan recognizes that almost 85% of farmers who are small and marginal are increasingly women. So therefore, women's names must be recorded as cultivators in revenue records, which again is a welcome and a new development that has taken place, and this definitely is going to empower women in the rural areas, because till now, while they were contributing in the rural workforce, their names were not in the records, which was a great discrepancy as far as the right to property is considered. Then also gender bias in institutions for information, credit, inputs, marketing, banking, etc. should be corrected by gender sensitizing the existing infrastructure providers, because unless and until these changes are incorporated at the level of institutions, the mindsets are not going to change. Then another change that must come about, and this also the issue has been taken up by the 11th 5-year plan, is invest in women to lift companies and countries. So therefore, unless and until this conscious investment in the women workforce is undertaken, things are not really going to change. Gender equality is a human rights issue, and in the interest of all. So therefore, unless and until this ideal is incorporated in the entire planning process, that gender equality is not only an issue of equality for women or to give rights to women, but it is in the interest of humanity as a whole, it is in the interest of betterment of the entire nation, entire country, and even men force are going to benefit out of this. No change is going to come, because when one only talks about a particular section or a particular marginalized group, then obviously the other sections feel alienated. So there needs to be a more holistic approach, and definitely women are not isolated individuals on the planet, they are parts of the families, and if their lives are improved, the lives of the entire family, state, nation is going to improve. Then the global gender gap, global gender pay gap is 23%. And is also rising to almost 40% in many rural areas. So therefore, specific strategies need to be devised in order to bridge this 23% wage gap in urban areas and 40% wage gap in rural areas, because this is again a grave kind of injustice that is existing in the country. Women representation in parliaments is also less. It is less than 1/4 and even lesser in the boardrooms. So whether it is the various government institutions or legislative institutions, parliaments, legislative assemblies, councils, or the boardrooms, we need to see more women, and we need to see almost 50% of women, because this is what their population is in the world. Then another very important aspect that needs a detailed understanding and research is the menace of child marriage. Though this has been banned, and the legal age for marriage is 18 years, but still this problem continues to persist. The highest rates of child marriages exist in states like Bihar, where there are 40% of the cases, then followed by West Bengal, Rajasthan, and there are some areas in Rajasthan like Bhilwara which have 55% and Chittorgarh with 54% of cases of child marriages. And in fact, every year, almost 1.5 million girls are married before they are age of 18 years. So this is such a sad state of affairs, because all these women, 1.5 million women, they could have got educated, they could have become independent, they could have taken up jobs, and they could have made a mark for themselves in the world and contributed to their families in a more positive and healthy way. But they ultimately ended up getting married, and so not only their dreams were shattered, but also they were not really able to contribute to the socio-political and economic upliftment of the country. There has been, though, a sharp decline in the cases of child marriages in India from 47% in 2005-2006 to 27% in 2015 and 16. But then some more practical measures need to be taken, more gender sensitization needs to be there, and the government needs to set up more initiatives and to curb the practice completely. Now, there are some suggestions also that need to be incorporated when one is talking about this issue of women and work. How their work pattern can be more facilitated, it can become more comfortable as well as less demanding. So, the most important aspect that needs to be incorporated in any organization or institution is gender sensitization as well as counseling. And this should not only be a periodic phenomena, it should be a regular phenomena which should become part of the overall work protocol. Then also the entire process of admission, recruitment and promotion. The policies need to be monitored with a gender lens. Then also one needs to encourage women students in the professional institutions through various supportive measures, and here also counseling and guidance can play a very important role. Then training in effective communication skills, leadership skills, presentation skills, negotiation and team building skills, because the present scenario with the onset of globalization, the work patterns have changed. So unless and until women are well versed in ICT and they are able to handle tricky and difficult situations, fluid situations, they will not really be able to make their mark and they will not really be able to handle the challenges. So all these kind of skill enhancement strategies must be incorporated right from the level of schooling, because here unless and until a solid background is created for women students and then carried on at the graduation and post-graduation level and then at the level of professional courses, unless and until all these various levels incorporate these strategies, no changes can be brought about. And last but not the least, a very important suggestion would be effective stress management, because women are holding the dual responsibility of domestic roles as well as working in the public sphere. So both public and private sphere have to be handled by them, which creates a lot of stress. And this, unless and until this stress management becomes part of their daily routine and they are well versed in stress management therapies, they would not really be able to come out of this vicious cycle of gender inequality. Then another very important suggestion would be encouraging networking and making them more enabled with ICT. Getting well versed in ICT, in computer technology, information and computer technology related subjects, and the principle of lifelong learning in order to re-enter the workforce once they have taken a break due to marriage and childbirth is also very important to harmonize their professional and domestic life, and in order to create a work-life balance. So therefore, by forging a new kind of partnership between men and women, this can be successfully integrated, and also empowering women in the fields of research, training, advocacy, as well as networking, because it is generally seen that men are able to network in a far more better way, because networking comes natural to them, because they have ample time at their disposal, because domestic responsibilities are not really shared by them. Cooking, etc., or purchasing things for family, all these responsibilities are considered as part of a woman's life cycle, and since she is the one who has to take care of the hearth and the home, men are able to have a lot of time, free time at their disposal. So they can indulge in grapevine, they can indulge in networking, they can build their own networks. So they have a very strong agency. Now, it is high time that women also develop some kind of agency. They also have this personal space in their workplaces where they can spend time, they can build networks, and then they can also become as influential as the other half. Now here I would like to give some examples from some of the states which earlier were considered as very poor in various gender parameters, but now some change can be seen. For example, in a state like Haryana, a number of schemes that have been adopted in this state from time to time, this has resulted in a far more positive change than was expected. For example, the Beti Bachao Beti Padhao program in Haryana, this has resulted in an improvement in not only in the sex ratio but also in the educational accomplishments of women. So for example, if we talk about sex ratio, there has been an improvement in almost 104 districts of Haryana. And another useful scheme has been Sukanya Samriddhi scheme. This allows parents to invest money with a far more greater share of return, and if the money is being saved for education and marriage of a girl child, then and the returns are much higher, clearly the message that is being driven home is that it is far more useful and beneficial to have the girl child rather than only male children in the family. Then there are some other contemporary policies that have been introduced by the government which are working in the right direction and bringing about a positive change. For example, women's empowerment, which is at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, has well been taken care of by various government initiatives. For example, provision of smoke-free kitchens, which again has been projected as largely a measure to facilitate the lives of women, and by extending LPG services in a number of rural areas and rural kitchens, the trend is clearly emerging of a far more healthier work environment for women in the families, where they do not have to keep on inhaling smoke 24 hours. Then another important scheme has been Jan Dhan Yojana, which has connected more than 16 crore women to the banking system, which again is not a small feat. And this is in fact the best example of financial inclusion, because generally banking has been associated with men, but with the help of this scheme, almost 16 crore women, and now the number is increasing day by day, they have been roped in the banking system. So therefore both saving has become not only a habit, but it has become part of their life cycle, and women are able to also benefit out of the direct cash transfers as part of a number of schemes. For example, Ujjwala Yojana or Swachh Bharat Mission. So as a result of taking off this initiative of Swachh Bharat Mission, where a number of toilets and such initiatives are being planned in the rural areas, and money is being handed down to the families who are ready to install such initiatives, the clear beneficiaries are women. Then almost 7.88 crore women have taken loans under the Mudra Yojana. So therefore now women are not only taking loans to become more self-reliant, to start their own enterprises, but they are also giving jobs to others, because when any unit is started by women, it is not she only who is going to benefit out of the scheme. It is the entire rural workforce, and with this kind of networking that is taking off in a big way in rural areas, the changes are bound to happen. So therefore, with these positive initiatives, a realization that comes to mind is that past informs the present. It is not that what has happened in the past is not going to influence our present. The need is to realize what wrong things were happening in the past and to take decisions accordingly and to make some revolutionary changes. And a statement that has been made by William Faulkner, the past is never dead, it is not even past. So therefore, we as citizens and our government needs to realize this, that a number of injustices happened in the past with women, and only by realizing that they were wrongs or they were injustices that were happening is not really going to bring about any change, because those injustices and those anomalies are continuing even today, and directly or indirectly they continue to influence the mindset even today, not only of men but also of women. So what we need are revolutionary strategies and some path-breaking changes in order to deal with the challenges of the past. So it is in this context that I would like to give reference to another landmark judgment that was made by the Supreme Court in 2017, a ban on instant triple talaq, which again can be described as one of the recent initiative which is a step further in the path of gender equality. Then even the Swachh Bharat campaign is not only about cleanliness, it is also to enhance the dignity of women and to do away with the indignity of open defecation, where women were forced to go out in open fields in order to ease themselves. So therefore, with these changes, definitely they reflect a positive mindset, not only on the part of the government but also on the part of the citizens who are accepting these changes with open minds and open hands, and this is definitely going to bring about a far more gender equitable society. So having discussed these issues, I shall now take a short break and then resume the lecture with some detailed reference to ICT and how it has brought about change in the lives of women. Thank you.
But this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving us this productive session where we are studying about women and work. This is the topic of today's discussion. Friends, there is a lot more for you. So you are requested to be with us as we are back after a short break. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on women and work. This is the topic of today's discussion, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Shruti Bibb. Dr. Shruti Bibb is an eminent expert, and we believe that you always get in-depth knowledge through her on various topics and issues. So taking the session forward, I would like to welcome our guest Dr. Shruti Bibb once again. Hello ma'am, welcome to the session.
Hello Geetika. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. So as we were discussing the influence of ICT and how information processing has brought about a change, it has not only created a much larger number of jobs but also has created a kind of job opportunity for women which they can indulge in even while sitting at home. So work from home opportunities are much larger in this sector as compared to other sectors. So here I would like to give you an example of Project SITA, S-I-T-A, and Women's Cooperative Mitra Mandal. Both these are the case studies from India. So the Project SITA, the full form of which is Studies in Information Technology Applications. This was a computer skill training program for almost 450 women from a disadvantaged background and with limited communication skills. The Global Challenge Award 2000 was given to this program, and also it was sponsored by InfoDev, which is an initiative of World Bank. So therefore, by selecting women from disadvantaged backgrounds and by empowering them, by giving them proper training and also by providing them equipment, this was a very welcome step, and this also created the right kind of examples for women to learn from. Now, as we were discussing information processing, Women's E-Cooperative Mitra Mandal, this had a professional wing which was generally related to training of trainers, research and development, as well as marketing and publicity. And all this was done exclusively by women who were specifically trained for this kind of work. Then it had an earning wing also, where there were both trainers as well as trainees, who used IT skills to generate greater income, and then also some kind of community participation and partnership was also involved in this. Then there was a learning wing, which not only implemented the learning strategy, but also it was about sharing the knowledge and building of networks. Then there was an association of both public and private organizations also, which was taken care of, and because ultimately it was private or public sector which became the providers of work, and they kind of patronized this this organization, and therefore both these setups worked in greater synergy. Now, coming to the issue of information processing and how Project Sita and Women's E-Cooperative Mitra Mandal in India began working. Here you can see on this slide some pictures and how a room housing some Sita trainees in a very basic kind of an infrastructure, probably in a rural area, and then the Sita head trainer also was a lady from a rural background, but who had been trained with the right kind of skills and infrastructure facilities, and also a senior instructor was added to this organization so that things could function more professionally and in a far more planned manner. Then another example that can be given of this kind of an initiative is Vijay Software Developers, VSD, again an initiative of India, where a very important role was played by Shefali Kapoor, who established an education and career guidance center in 1990. This was a computer academy. Soon it became a computer academy from 1991 onwards, and this VSD established a number of branches. The turnover of more than 22,000 US dollars, which later on was increasing by leaps and bounds, and a workforce of 6 software developers and engineers, again all were women. The technology transfer was very successful because of the right kind of training that Shefali Kapoor had got in as part of her career and guidance, and she was a graduate in computer sciences, which greatly enabled and helped her to bring in the right kind of networking practices. She entered the business at a time when computer started to be used for back office support and also for payroll management as well as inventory control, etc. So therefore she completely used the opportunity and her skills and training and created this kind of an infrastructure which really not only empowered her but her entire labor force. Then there are some other conducive policies that can be mentioned in passing reference. The number of women programmers, designers, inventors and fixers of computers, however, is still limited in the developing world, and this is a challenge that must be accepted by women. Software sector in India has grown by almost 50% since 1990s, where not only exports are created in this field, but domestic jobs and technical talents are also enhanced. But again, women are falling short of the expected role models, and they are not really able to make full use of the available resources and challenges. However, a change that can be brought about by the government is by lessening the cost of the fees. Therefore, by introducing less expensive courses on IT, more and more girls can take training, and then they can be ready for getting absorbed in the market. By increasing the number of girls and women studying IT related subjects in formal schooling also, the challenge can be met. One needs to have a change in the overall approach and in the change in the vocabulary itself. So the southern continents or the developing world need to throw off the inherited concepts, and also they need to advocate their women for a much larger and challenging roles. Now coming to the whole issue of gender differentiation and how it impacts women's work-life balance. In relation to work, women have longer days than men at work as well as at home. In valuation of work also, one can say that most of the times women's work is undervalued. The domestic work is definitely undervalued. So is her work in the outside realm. And if we talk about the public spheres, while men hold higher leadership positions, women tend to fill the roles of gaps. They tend to fill the roles of support persons rather than themselves becoming leaders and themselves becoming management trainees and employers. So therefore, there exists a discrepancy in managing the world resources. Women earn 1/10 of world's income for doing 2/3 of world's work. Now this is a very important statement which all of us must take note of, that while you are performing 2/3 of world's work, this world's work includes both the domestic work, the child rearing and bearing work, as well as work that you perform in the public sphere. So both private and public sphere combined amounts to 2/3 of the work, or maybe in some cases more than 2/3 of the work. But when it comes to ownership of the resources or your control over the resources, you are only owning 1/10 of world's income. So such a great discrepancy exists even in present times. So therefore, going back to the whole issue of gender discrimination, equality for all citizens, irrespective of gender, caste, religion or race, forms, it exists as per constitution. It exists legally, but India is still a society with a strong preference for sons, which is a reality that cannot be negated. So therefore, gender discrimination is not only a peripheral phenomenon. It is not as if it exists only in rural areas or among the poorer sections of the society. Rather, it is omnipresent. It exists both in the developed areas as well as in the developing areas. And as the statistics shows, which I have shared sufficiently with the students, the statistics shows that this gender discrimination is fairly widespread, and unless and until some path-breaking strategies are adopted, some revolutionary strategies are adopted, things are not really going to change, or they will change very slowly. Now, if you look at the slide that is being shown, this is about the sex ratio, that is number of women per 1,000 men. The source is, of course, Census of India 2001. Here you can see how in 1901, the sex ratio, that is number of women born per 1,000 men, was slightly above 970. But if you compare it to 1981, it was reaching almost 935, and by 2001 it had almost touched 930. So therefore, rather than progressing, the sex ratio has been showing a declining trend, and this is very worrisome. And this declining trend was found far more than 930, even lesser than 930 in many of the areas, for example in Haryana. So therefore, some path-breaking strategies need to be adopted in order to do away with this menace of declining sex ratio, which has become a great challenge for our country. Therefore, the development of women not only should become part of the strategy, rather it should become the very essence of planning also. And now sharing some details regarding the Indian experience and how women's performance in work, in employment opportunities can be understood from this perspective. The principle of gender equality not only provides for equality before the law and equal protection of the law, but also prohibition of discrimination as well as equality of opportunity in public employment. Now, just by saying that there is equality of opportunity in public employment, the government cannot really wash its hands and cannot become a meek spectator of what all discrepancies continue to exist in the workplaces. There are many anomalies that exist, and these need to be taken head on. So now I would be briefly referring to participation by women at various levels, whether it is politics or economy or a number of other institutions and sectors, and then we can kind of reflect back on how things have changed and why they have not really changed. While Indian women played a very important and active role in Indian national movement, especially with the onset of Gandhian mass movement struggles, their participation kept on increasing, and they provided a very important striking force to a number of hunger strikes and a number of dharnas, hartals, and picketing of shops and picketing of liquor shops, etc. These were some of the salt marches, etc., satyagraha, etc. So all these were very important movements, and the success of these movements depended a lot on participation of women from 1920s onwards. But their participation did not really translate into their increasing participation in the public life after independence, and the post-independence era can again be described as one marked with lesser women participation. So the representation of women in legislatures, in parliaments, in councils continued to remain lesser, far lesser than their 50% of population. Now, an important development that can be discussed here is the 81st Amendment Bill, which was drafted in 1996, that proposed the reservation of 1/3 of seats in the Lok Sabha, but still this lies pending for passing, and therefore this gap, the political gap in their political participation, in enjoying their rights in becoming the rulers and leaders of the country, continues to remain elusive. Then the year 2001 was announced by the Indian government as Women's Empowerment Year. The National Commission was for women had already been set up in 1992, but no amount of legislation is adequate. No amount of legislation can really bring about a change if there are changes in the socio-cultural structures of society, and unless and until there is political will to bring about changes in the overall functioning of the government, and also to give women their right of participation and to reserve 50% of seats in the parliament for them, things are not really going to change. Then discussing the legislative safeguards which are there, and which India was a party to most of these legislative safeguards. For example, Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, then the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. India has been a signatory to all these important developments internationally, but when it comes down to the national strategizing women participation in politics, politicians take a backseat, especially the male politicians become very scared, and they do not want to share powers with women. So therefore, so much opposition towards this bill which can empower women. Then Article 15 of the Constitution also prohibits any kind of discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, creed, sex or place of birth. And the National Commission for Women was also set up as early as 1992 under the Commission of Women Act that was put in force in 1990. And as a result, the constitutional amendments to reserve for women, more than 33% of the seats in the Panchayati Raj was also a welcome move in this direction. Now coming to women participation in the public services, particularly in the central government, and how various changes have been introduced in this in order to facilitate greater participation and equitable participation of women, is the insistence on maternity leave benefits and guidelines for the provision of crèche facilities, etc. Then also some kind of paternity leaves for husbands. Though this duration is again very less, it should be much more than presently has been recommended for. Also age relaxation for widows and women separated from their husbands for appointments in group C and D posts, exemptions from requirement of educational qualification in respect of widows of deceased government servants appointed on compassionate grounds for posts of peons, etc. These are some of the provisions that have been made by the government to facilitate their greater participation in the workforce. A very important reference can be made here to sexual harassment at the workplace, and a number of guidelines have been introduced in order to deal with this menace. The 1997 Supreme Court judgment on sexual harassment at workplace, which is known as the Vishakha guidelines, is very important, and all of us, not only women who are working but even men, they should be aware of this so that they are able to safeguard the rights of women who are working. Every employer is required to provide for effective complaints committee in the organization. So there have to be specific procedures and remedies, and also awarding compensation to women victims. In sexual harassment complaints, the authorities are urged to expedite cases, and also disposal of cases is closely monitored. Rule 3C concerns the prohibition of sexual harassment of working women, Rule 3C of Vishakha guidelines, and this enjoins the government servant not to indulge in any kind of sexual harassment of any woman in the workplace. Also, a woman in charge of the workplace has to take appropriate actions to prevent any kind of sexual harassment to any woman at the workplace. Therefore, it is important to understand actually what sexual harassment includes and how one can describe what action amounts to sexual harassment. So, one of course is any kind of physical advance or contact, any kind of physical advances or attack fall in this category. Then sexually explicit remarks, then showing any kind of pornographic material, and also any unwelcome physical gesture, verbal or non-verbal, which can be of sexual nature, is completely prohibited. So therefore, women need not tolerate any kind of objectionable behavior, because they have this law which is firmly on their side, and in name of promotion or in name of any kind of benefit that is being given to them, if the authority or any person in their organization is misbehaving with them, they can very well raise their voice. It is in fact duty of the employer to prevent or deter the commission of such acts, and to provide for quick resolution and also practical resolution, and also to make women feel comfortable and confident in the workplaces. Then the complaint mechanism in such cases is also has to be there in every organization. It is not only mandatory, but it is in fact part of the legal process also. And victims can also opt for transfer of the perpetrator or their own self in order to deal with this situation in a far more practical way. So therefore, it is very much the responsibility of government to exercise due diligence to prevent, investigate, and also in accordance with the national legislation, with the constitutional provisions, punish acts of violence against women, whether those acts are perpetrated by the state or by the private persons. A number of researches that have been carried on by a number of women studies scholars, gender economists in Asia, in Africa and in Latin America over the last 2-3 decades have shown that globalization since 1990s has enhanced, in fact, patriarchal controls over women's sexuality, fertility and labor by superimposing commercial values on the conventional values throughout the world. So therefore, if conventional values, if traditional values, if orthodoxy is being replaced by globalization, this does not mean that automatically there are more rights for women or lives of women have changed for better, because now conventional values are being replaced by commercial values, and this commercialization, this blatant commercialization and this blatant neoliberalism has not really benefited women the way it could have, because neoliberalism is based on the principle of equality, on the principle of freedom and on the principle of demand and supply. So all these are logical principles, but when it comes down to benefiting women, the benefit has been felt more by men rather than by women. Rather, it has been the exploitation that has seen the increasing trend. So globalization has enhanced survival strategies. In fact, the struggles of households, the struggles of families to survive in this changing global world has further put a toll on women. Here an important reference can be made to Arjun Sen Gupta Committee's report 2006, which is a stark reminder of the huge size and poor conditions for women in the unorganized sector. The report has revealed that in India, almost 370 million people, which is almost more than 85% of the working population, work in the unorganized sector. So more than 85% people are working in the unorganized sector, and a majority of them are women. So unless and until this unorganized sector also is closely monitored, the exploitation of women would continue unabated. Out of this, almost 120 million are women. So they are contributing to almost 60% of the national economic output of the country without adequately getting compensated or without adequately being taken care of by the state. Around 28 crore work in the rural sector, of which an estimate 22 crore are in the agricultural sector. So therefore, women make up 11 to 12 crore or more, of which 8 crore are engaged in agriculture without any kind of gender equality norms being operating in this unorganized sector. Their lives are truly miserable. So therefore, having discussed all these changes and having apprised you of the various problems that exist and the various challenges that exist, one needs to reflect back and think about how all this can be changed. What all are the changes that need to be incorporated from time to time, and for this it is not only the constitutional framework that needs to be probably revised with more stringent measures being put in place, but also some kind of change has to come at the level of society, culture, value system, and in this both the family as well as the schools can play a very important role, because these are the building blocks of the society. So the way the attitudes can be changed right from the onset in the family and then later on in the schools can do wonders, and this only can bring about a more positive change in the whole thought process of individuals. And this change has to come not only in the minds of men but also women, because ultimately women have to think for not only for themselves but also for other women. They have to empower other women, and all this cannot happen only if the state is doing something for them. They have to take the matters in their own hand, they have to become more responsive, they have to think creatively, and they also have to become part of the whole. They have to think themselves as part of the whole, as part of the nation, as not only as passive receivers but also as active participants in this whole journey of change. So in conclusion, I would like to talk about a famous educationist, Paulo Freire. So the pedagogical approach of Paulo Freire is very important here, and it can give us some very relevant lessons. Paulo Freire talked about critical consciousness and critical consciousness as part of praxis. By praxis, he meant the teaching learning process, and how any kind of political illiteracy can only be tackled through this praxis. That is, unless and until the learner, in this case women or the other underprivileged sections of society, they become part of this teaching learning process, they become part of this overall growth story, which one can call GAD, that is gender and development, rather than GID, that is gender in development. Things cannot really change. So with this critical consciousness becoming far more practical approach and becoming far more a valid approach, nothing can really be changed, and a more constructivist approach in education is also called for, where the students can counter the barriers not only through their curriculum but also through a more hands-on approach, through a more practical approach, and by countering life kind situations in the schools by changing the role models, by changing the stories in the textbooks, by revising the curriculum specifically with reference to issues of gender equality. And in this reference, one can give example of how since 2005, NCERT has started changing its textbooks, and the National Focus Group paper that came out from 2005 onwards incorporated all these strategies, and they started questioning the given categories of what a male and what a female was supposed to do, how they were going to perform various role models in various stories. So having discussed these various parameters, I think the students are now going to be far more open in their minds as far as the issue of gender equality is concerned. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving us this productive session on women and work. And dear friends, so we have completed this series on gender and education, and very soon we are going to start up with the new series. Friends, all the lectures pertaining to the series are there for you on the YouTube. This lecture is also going to be uploaded. So friends, if you have any queries or feedback after watching all these lectures, do write to us at info.cec@nic.in, or if you feel so there is some topic which you like to be covered under the series, then also you may write to us at the same ID, that is info.cec@nic.in. With this note, we are taking your leave with the promise that we will be meeting very soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again.
Thanks a lot, Vidya.